All right, what's up, comic book fans and Star Wars fans? I'm Anchorpete, and here we are for another interview. We have a very special guest today. We have Landry Quinn Walker, who has adapted a whole bunch of different media for comics, and that includes novels as well. And he did this book right here, which is a tie into The Force Awakens, which is about a bunch of the background characters. But I really absolutely love this book. We're going to talk about this today. And Landry has also made some of his own original graphic novels and comics too, including Pepper Page Saves the Universe and The Last Siege. So Landry, thank you so much. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So I was just going through your work, and I saw that you kind of started out working on Disney Adventures, that magazine.
Yeah, I started working on Disney Adventures around 1999, 2000, right in there, with my frequent collaborator, Eric Jones. We had been doing comics for probably about 8 years beforehand, starting with a lot of small press collective group called Puppy Toss in Berkeley, where we were doing a lot of mini comic zine distribution, and then underground comics type stuff, very adult oriented. Up until about 1999, and we started shifting to all ages, and then that ended up a natural fit with Disney Adventures. We ended up working with them.
Oh, cool. Okay. So I know that you've worked with him on a whole bunch of different projects, right? So, like, did you guys start out as friends before you started working together, or did you meet, like, because you're both, like, trying to get into the industry?
Oh, with Eric?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we were friends. We met, I was 16. Well, he's 17. Like he's 3 months older than me. So every year I get to mock him for his age for 3 months. Is how that works. I've known him since I was 16, and but we all wanted, like, our whole social group, we wanted to work in comics. We wanted to make books and comics happen. And Eric and I had been friends for 2 years maybe when we started, like, I looked at what he was doing as an artist. He was the only one of our social group that really was focusing on sequentials. I went over to his house, and he had just 20 pages of this vampire story he had been working on. I'm looking at this going, because I can't draw. I can't draw very well at all. And I'm like, well, so I wanted to work with him on, and so we started working on stuff. We've been, I don't know how many books we put out together now, but I mean, it's a large pile. It's been a few years.
So, like, when did you make the choice that you were going to work on all ages stuff? Like, what was the deciding factor there?
Well, it's interesting because, we wanted to do kind of some more serious drama stuff when we were, like, I don't know, 17, but our idea of serious drama was really kind of, angsty and pretentious, and that wasn't working out. No one was taking it seriously when we showed them the work, and so we started doing really snarky autobio type, really bad stuff for a little while. But it was good in the sense that it gave us, we got to flex what we were doing a little bit and experiment and learn to craft. So it's good in that sense. And the thing is, we were doing all these comic conventions. We go to these shows, and you'd have to tell half the audience, if not more, yeah, you can't look at that book. I cannot sell you that book. Even though you're, like, just a few years younger than me, this is not something I can sell to you under 18 person. And or kids who are hungry for something to read, and it's bright and colorful and fun, and they look at it and go, I want to read that. And, like, no, you don't. And so we pivoted just out of, I had been a huge fan of the Harvey comic stuff, Casper, the Friendly Ghost, Hot Stuff, particularly Hot Stuff, the Little Red Devil, because he was snarky when I was a kid, when I was a real little kid. And I always bugged me they didn't have, like, a Frankenstein monster, a Wolfman. And Eric and I had been throwing around, something came up, and one of us thrown the phrase Little Gloomy at the other. And then we kind of said, it's the name of a character. So we played with it, and we came up with a cast of monster characters with this character, Little Gloomy, at the core. And so we did our own kind of Harvey Comics-esque series that did really well for us. And Disney, this editor, who was the new editor of Disney Adventures magazine, got a hold of it and said, why don't you do this for Disney? The Little Gloomy stuff. We took Little Gloomy to Disney Adventures, and we've been self-publishing it through a company called Slave Labor Graphics, and then we took it to Disney Adventures. And but that was really why. 1999. That's 1999. Long answer to get to where you could. Yeah.
No, but it's a super interesting answer because, I actually have always wanted to write comics myself, right? And so whenever anyone tells me their story of how they got into the industry and especially the early years and kind of working with stuff and not knowing where things were going to go, that's always super interesting to me. So this Little Gloomy character that you created, he was in the Disney Adventures comic?
It was.
I'm sorry, she.
No. Disney Adventures was interesting because at this point, and I think Steve Bailing, the editor, was largely responsible for this. Well, not large because Heidi McDonald did some of it too, but I think Steve really drove it forward. Disney Adventures was publishing multiple creator-owned all ages comics in its magazine every month. We had Jetpack Pets by Gary Black, and Little Gloomy by Eric and myself. Kid Gravity, we did another one, which was where Little Gloomy was our 1940s, our love letter to 1940s horror. Kid Gravity was our 1950s science fiction. Let's see. And then was it Art and Franco? If you know Art Baltazar and Franco of Tiny Titans, they were part of that group too. They were doing Gorilla, which I think they actually sold to Disney Adventures. But it was a creator-driven project. So there was kind of and John Green, who's doing a book, Investigators, for Second right now, the same publisher who just did my Pepper Page Saves the Universe book. John Green was working with them. There was a lot of us, and this is going back. Now we're talking 22 years ago.
Yeah.
So Disney was publishing all this creator-owned material, and there's an interesting side segue on that if you want to hear it.
Sure, please.
Okay, so Little Gloomy, Eric and I did Little Gloomy comics for a few years, and we started working with Henry Selick. He was the director of Nightmare Before Christmas, James and the Giant Peach, Coraline. So he was interested in taking Little Gloomy and adapting it into a stop-motion animated TV series. And we were working with 1492, and I went down to Hollywood with Henry Selick, and we pitched to Nickelodeon, to Nelvana, to Warner Brothers, to one other, I forget who, was Cartoon Network. Did I say them already? And and Disney. Disney was the last one. And I thought the pitch went really well. Henry even said later he thought that pitch went really well. We really nailed that pitch, except the Disney people just kind of leaned back and was like, so you're saying that you're putting out so I had the comic, we had an action figure out at that point, and he's like, so you're saying you're producing toys and comic books based on something from our magazine, and now you're pitching it to us as a show? And I'm like, well, I mean, your magazine is publishing something I own. He's like, yeah, that's not how it works. We're gonna have our lawyers look into this. I'm like, okay, you can do that.
Yeah.
It went badly because of that. We did end up getting a TV show with Canal Plus in France and multiple other countries, and eventually made it to America. Little Gloomy was rebranded as this thing called Scary Larry. So there's actually a cartoon series of this one out there. I haven't watched, so I can't speak to it.
Really?
It became so far removed from our original comic that while there was a lot of things I looked at I liked and thought were cool, I was just in a different headspace. So it's like, all right, that exists. It's fine.
Sure. So then, what did it end up airing on in the U.S.? Was it on the Disney Channel or?
Well, no, it wasn't Disney, because Disney, they wanted to sue me. No, it was funny because we had so much incredible support from publishing, but Disney is such a massive company. These are all different departments, and it was just there was never anything that came of it. They said that, and of course I'm sure they talked to a lawyer, and the lawyer looked and said, yeah, you don't own this, and that was probably the end of it. But the pitch was soured at that point. It wasn't going to get picked up. We actually got a really good offer from Warner Brothers that almost happened. It would have been amazing.
Oh,
no, it was on it. Scary Larry aired in like 13 different countries and 13 different languages.
Wow.
And it was most of them before it reached here.
Mm-hmm.
All I know is I looked at some of the advertisements for it because I thought it was really cool seeing a character I created next to, somebody dressed like an X-Wing pilot and the Pink Panther and something else. Like, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It was cool, but it was broadcast on a channel I didn't get. So
yeah,
and they never sent me the episodes to watch. So yeah, all right, I'm okay. It's fine. We retained our publishing rights, and we focus on books.
So like, how many original books have you put out? Because I know there's Pepper Page, and then there's The Last Siege, and then Last Siege is Image, and then Pepper Page is a different imprint altogether. Like, how many have you put out?
Well, Pepper Page is with First Second. It's all ages. Image was one previous. I worked with Justin Greenwood and numerous others. Eric actually did the colors in the first half of that. Our friend Brad did the other half. We had Pat on letters, and he does lettering on a lot of my stuff. Pat Broso. Okay, so I'm going to discount my first 8 years because the books aren't great, but there's a couple books then. Then there's 2 little Gloomy trades. There's a Kid Gravity trade. There's 2 books. It's one story, but it's broken into 2 books called Danger Club, which is it's still Eric drawing it, but in a completely different art style, and it's this kind of like what if Teen Titans met Lord of the Flies, deconstructionist sort of thing, extremely brutal, and it's all an analog for looking at the history of comics publishing, how we went from this idyllic place to this that celebrated hope and heroism and joy to this place that became about kind of a meat grinder of action, and these characters are functionally fighting against their own reboots to try to get back to what they had been. So that's called Danger Club. So there's Danger Club, creator owned.
But that's the context of Danger Club, is that they're literally fighting against their reboots?
They're literally fighting against their own reboots.
That sounds awesome.
They've already been rebooted like 51 times, and they're fighting against the 52nd. I don't know where I got that number from. It just happened.
That kind of works for DC, right?
Yeah. I'm not saying that. It's a total coincidence.
Right.
But yeah, it's because there's a lot of beautiful like bits of we basically have. Did we care about spoilers here? Can I spoil
No. Let's spoiler central. Let's spoil.
Yeah. So functionally, there's this entity, Kronos, this all-consuming, all ever-growing appetite that exists beyond, the realms of humanity. That is consuming and regurgitating reality and rebooting it every time. And he's functionally the editor. He's functionally the editorial process when you work for these big corporations. And so it keeps turning the universe into a more grotesque parody of what had been the previous time, always inching it further and further to it being a grotesque enough sort of ruination that he can emerge into reality and destroy all. So I'm not saying I ever had a negative experiences with corporate editorial practices, but it's there's a lot to discuss there, and the endless. Being a person who loves a good reboot, there's a lot of difference between one artistically done, creatively driven, versus something that feels like a corporate mandate and a sales bump attempt, especially when they happen so often. And the funny thing is, we actually put this book together 2010, I think, is when 2009, 2010. We were just finishing our Supergirl Cosmic Adventures in the 8th grade run, which was an all-ages miniseries for DC Comics.
Right.
And it was, we wanted to do something that was the antithesis of this, which everyone said, don't do. Do not do that. Only do all-ages stuff. Create a brand yourself. And I'm like, that's really smart. I'm not going to do that. It sounds really boring. And, but they're like, but that's how you make money. I'm like, man, if I wanted to make money, I wouldn't be in comics. What's wrong with you?
Right.
There's so many things I could do that are easier than comics.
So, well, speaking of dealing with corporations and stuff, I mean, you've dealt with so many licensed properties, right? And so is the process different for each company? Like, is it different working with Warner Brothers for a property like Supergirl versus Star Wars for Disney?
I mean, it can be different working for two different properties for the same company.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay. There's when you're working for DC on a DC property, there's a little bit of a structural difference in terms of you're not dealing with an editorial process that is one step removed, that is licensed it from a group whose only role is to oversee and make sure that you stay in a certain lane. There's a little more flexibility, but it's not that different. It can just be like, for an example, working on Star Wars in 2015 versus working on Star Wars in 2021 are fundamentally different experiences. Not because of anybody being difficult to work with. I want to be clear on that. But
Sure.
because there is so much more. The slate had just been wiped clean in 2015, right?
Right.
So when I came in 2015 working on my Star Wars novellas, I could just kind of do whatever I wanted to it, within reason. It was a little bit of the Wild West. Like, there's a blank canvas there's the movies, and there's pretty much nothing else for this brief moment.
Right.
And so I'm like, they go to this planet, and this alien race shows up, and this is how the Tibrans became part of the Rebel Alliance. That was in one of my comics.
Okay.
That was, you could do this stuff that hadn't been mapped out by other people. But once you map it out, or somebody else maps it out, the whole goal is that it becomes part of this new canon. So now somebody else is like, man, I have this great idea for bringing the Tibrans into the Rebel Alliance. And they're going to go, oh, Landry Walker already did that 3 years ago. You got to back up and do something else.
Right.
It's like, that makes it hard. So I'm coming in, like, I'm doing some stuff now on Star Wars, and I have to work 10 times as hard to get a pitch through, not because they are making me work harder, but because the job is, every time a new book comes out, the job becomes infinitely more complex. Where does your story take place? What domino chains does it push if you do the wrong thing?
Yep.
So
like right now, you talked about pitching a Star Wars story. Is it that they come to you and they say, okay, we want you to write a Star Wars comic? What do you have? Like, what idea do you have? Is that how it works? Or
yeah, basically. It's part of the having worked in the industry as long as I have, and knowing a lot of people, just from having worked with them before. I don't know how, like, other people come to this stuff cold. A lot of people use agents. I've never really had an agent. But they come to me and they say, hey, do you want to do a Star Wars story? And I go, yes, because I never say no to that. I'm
Right.
insane. And it's like the six stories in my Tales from a Galaxy Far, Far Away novel.
Yeah.
Were all my original pitches. What they did is they sat me down. I've talked about this before. They sat me down. I went to Lucasfilm. There was a room with a bunch of us in it, a bunch of the editorial and me, and they put out like these 20 different shots of aliens that were going to be in Force Awakens. Then he said, we want you to do one with Baba Joe. We want you to do one with Unkar Plutt. The other 4, why don't you just pick what you like? And so I'm looking at it going, I like this guy with the red helmet. He looks cool. Yeah. And I like this guy, Constable Zuvio. He sounds awesome.
Yeah.
And so I picked those, and I came up with, in some of the cases, like the Fragosian aliens, I came up with their home planet, their biological, like what makes them unique, their nature. I made them very sinister. which is why it's weird when you see the janitor OP Pitt in Resistance, and he's so cute, and everyone's like, I'm like, no, he has this giant wide mouth full of fangs that are poison.
Right.
I talked about this recently too on a different podcast. But I'm going to say it because it's so awesome to have gotten it in. Was I made their home planet Tansil 5, which appears in print as Tansil V, which was Transylvania, basically.
Oh, perfect.
They're space vampires.
Yeah. Oh, man. Well, that's what's interesting about that collection of stories, right? Is because each story is so different in the tone. And to me, it's just amazing that you could pitch those stories to Disney or to Lucasfilm, and that they would A, accept it, and B, like allow them to all be in the same compilation, right? Because like with your the second story with the chef at Mascanata's castle, right? First of all, I wanted to ask you about that too, because that's like a murder mystery, right?
Yeah.
And then besides that, like it seemed like it was almost like an episode of like Top Chef too.
It was, yes.
Okay. So I was wondering about that. Like so like with the inspiration for that, were you just like, okay, I want to see how I could put Top Chef and a murder mystery together into Star Wars?
Yeah,
Okay.
pretty much exactly that. So there's a few things that go on with that. One is I was working full time for Sideshow Collectibles at the time.
Okay.
An amazing company. I worked for them for like 2 years on their Court of the Dead property and had a wonderful time doing it. But I was full. It's the only time in my freelance career that I've been on like the payroll. But my time was dedicated to them. They were paying me for my time. So I get this call to work on Star Wars Force Awakens. Actually, while I was at Sideshow, I get this email and I'm like, ugh. And there's no way I could say no, but I also took my promise to devote my time during the week to them very seriously. So I could only work on this Force Awakens stuff on the weekends.
Oh, wow.
And I had, with the timeline they gave me to work on it, it basically gave me 1 day per story. Now I'd met with the story group and other people, including Mike Siglain, who was an old friend. We had worked together on Batman at DC Comics. And Mike and I are sitting across the table from each other. And Mike is a hardcore fan of genre fiction in general. And I'm starting to realize where he's coming from. And I look at, and him and I kind of share a look. And I'm like, really, you want each story to just embrace a different genre. Let's just do this. Like this one is let's get the tropes of an old romance novel, a romance story. Let's get the tropes of a pirate story. Let's get the tropes of a Western. And then murder mystery. And I wrote the Anchorpete one and the which was my romance one.
Right.
And I wrote the Strono Tugs one, which is the chef murder mystery one. Those are the last two I wrote, and I went a little more crazy with those, especially the Strono Tugs one. I mean, I created this little death trap cooking.
Yeah.
And why that would even exist, I don't know. It was just fun. I would probably, if I had been able to see Force Awakens first, I might have set the tone of that one pretty differently. But that's the other thing. You go in blind. I wrote all those months before the movies came out. I didn't have a script. Hadn't seen the movie. You have no idea if the characters you're writing, if they'll appear still. Like, look at Constable Zuvio.
Yeah.
Where's he?
Yeah.
And then the Crimson Corsair ends up having a line in the film. I'm like, nice.
That's so interesting. I didn't even think about the fact that you hadn't seen the movie. I always thought of it like you saw some kind of cut of it or the script or something. That's interesting.
Yeah, well, I'm working on a WandaVision tie-in thing now, and another one that's a what's it called? Winter Soldier. I'm only working on it. Winter Soldier, Falcon thing, tie-in thing with that too. And I have seen, the only thing I've seen is what everyone else has seen when it comes out.
Oh, wow.
TV, and it makes it very hard. So sometimes you look at, like, you'll see people, like, I remember when Force Awakens came out, I was talking to a retailer friend who was really mad about the timing of the comic books and the content of the comic books, and they didn't know anything about. I'm like, man, you're not thinking about how this stuff works. Like, everyone would love to put out the comics earlier. You're saying the comics came out too late for you to properly capitalize them, and you could have made a lot more money if they came out. And, like, you're blaming the creators, you're blaming the publisher, you're blaming Marvel. It's like, you don't, even high ups in editorial, even people in publishing department at Lucasfilm aren't necessarily seeing everything they need to see to make these things happen. That, like, you have, in some of these movies, you have actors who literally all they know of the movie script is their scenes. They have not read they have no context. And you would expect them to tell someone like me what's going on? They don't trust me. Because someone always ruins it for the rest of us. Someone leaks this stuff.
Yeah.
And so it's made our job and harder and harder. And it's made material that's meant to tie in. And let's face it, you need that material to come out with the movie to get the sales. If you come out 6 months after the movie, people are like, well, I don't care anymore.
Right, exactly. And it's sad too, because like this is the only volume, right? There isn't like one that ties into The Last Jedi. There's one that does Rise of Skywalker, right?
Well, Well, I kind of feel like, because they approached me about doing one for Last Jedi, which I wanted to do, and I think that something happened and it switched to the Canto Bight book instead.
Oh, okay, okay.
And they had a variety of authors work on that. But I think fundamentally, and I'm guessing here, I don't know, but I think fundamentally that is the spiritual successor.
Sure.
It fills that space publishing wise. I would have liked to have done another, and I would have liked to have done more with the same characters. So honestly, I just wanted to keep going with at least Constable Zuvio and the Crimson Corsair. I just love both of those characters so much. So
Yeah. And doesn't the Crimson Corsair, isn't he like seen in The Rise of Skywalker too?
yeah, I actually didn't know that until I read about it online, because he's there and he's gone in a blip.
Yeah.
And I still haven't actually seen him in the film. I need to go. Maybe I finally looked, but he does. He is one of the he joins the Resistance, which is in line. He's a swashbuckling pirate. He's an opportunist kind of character, but he's not a malevolent or evil or mercenary character. He's simply, a flamboyant swashbuckler. Making his way. And it's you even get a hint of it in Force Awakens. Maz Kanata says, those guys will take you where you need to go to Finn, and he's going to join their crew to get dropped off. They're cool guys. They're fine. Yeah, we'll give you a ride. It's fine. They're chill.
Right.
So they would join the Resistance, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because like when you read your book, it's weird to think of what Maz Kanata's castle is, right? Because like you said, the kitchen has this like death trap in it, and then in the castle too, you have your two surgeons, right? And it's yeah. So like, what were they telling you about Maz Kanata's castle? Like, what were they trying to evoke with it?
Well, what I was told, and I think I was told it's all in a state of flux right now. So anything we tell you may not be exactly how things turn out in the film, because things change, especially when you're dealing with the CG characters where they may make changes at the last minute.
Sure.
So they said that, I think the only description I got was, she's an ancient pirate queen, and that I was given the impression that she doesn't deal with people very often and is fairly cold and aloof and remote. I don't remember if that's what I was actually told or if that's how I inferred it.
Sure.
Regardless, it's not what we got. She's gregarious. She's warm. She's right there pouring drinks for everyone, and she knows everyone by name. It's like, hey, I'm Maz Kanata. What's going on? Right. And that's fine. That's great. But I didn't write her castle like that. I wrote it more like, more of a sinister and foreboding place that still had a lot of infrastructure to it, like a lot of people living and working there. It's a business.
Yeah.
That happens to take place in a sprawling, massive fortress that is fairly sinister. Because I can't really see, it's hard to gel the Maz Kanata's castle of the film with the one where I've got, the Fragosians, like, taking people and experimenting on them. And she's like, no, that's cool. It's fine. Let me pour you a drink. I'm gregarious and lovable. So
then, like, with the surgeons, right? Like, the person they work on, the thief, right? That they change her face to look like her former partner. Like, did you make her up completely from scratch?
Yeah. Rin Biggleston and Beely Admas. Because B. Lee Admas is named after my wife, Belinda Lee Adams.
Oh, okay.
And I murdered her on page 1. Sorry. And her friend, Branwen Bigglestone, became Rin Biggleston.
Okay.
So, yeah, you put in the people around you where you can. Actually, that name worked really well for Star Wars. But it's fun. You get a chance to do that. Like I did that with the cooking. So it's a murder victim is Rob's Ely. I was just this weekend hanging out with my friend Rob Ely and mentioning we really got to visit your grave that they put in Star Wars Battlefront 2. He has a gravestone that says here lies Rob's Ely, the chef. It's on Takodana. I'm like, you have a grave. There's a grave for you.
That is so cool.
I keep murdering everyone around me in
Right,
this.
right. Well, I was wondering, was there significance behind the names of the droids that were taster droids too?
Yeah, there was. And one was inspired by my friend Janelle. She was my editor for a bit at Sideshow. She was an editor I worked with when I was working one of my rounds at Disney. I always go through rounds at Disney. At that time, I did like 2 years of Disney, no, just 2 years of Marvel Superheroes magazine.
Okay.
So I got to write the pages of like who would win in a fight, Hulk or She-Hulk. I got to decide that.
That's
And then
awesome.
I had one friend come over and I kind of instigated. I knew what I was doing. I instigated a little debate of who would win. He's like, "Oh, this character would win in a fight." You know the way we do. I go, "No, actually, this character would." He's like, "Oh, no, no." I'm like, "I have proof. It's official." I pulled out my magazine. I'm like, "There it is.
Real.
I wrote it."
Nice.
I got to decide that. By the way, She-Hulk won in a fight with Hulk.
Oh, nice. Okay.
People will argue that, but my logic, Hulk is the strongest one there is. I'm a big believer in that. But it wasn't about strength. Of all the people, the Hulk would have a bit of reservation on his temper and hold back, even subconsciously. It was his cousin, and
Okay.
but she wouldn't hold back against him because she would have she's in full capacity of her intelligence would be. She would know she had to take him down.
Well, what was the context of that fight? Like, why were they fighting each other?
They didn't matter. You had a page because it's a kids magazine. You had a page like who would win in a fight.
Oh, okay.
And okay. And then you list the reasons why, and you let kids do their own vote. You know, yeah, that's silly stuff. But I put her.
That's awesome. Okay. Yeah. Wow. So, that's one of the things that I appreciate that you've done, right? Because it seems like so much of your career has been making books that are for all ages. And I really feel like our industry, well, not our industry, the comic industry.
It's all of ours.
Okay. Yeah. As like someone who's put like a lot of money into comics and loves comics, I want comics to be successful. I don't want it to like fade away. And
that makes it your industry too. I'm a big believer in that. So.
Yeah. Well, I just feel like your kind of work is like so essential because I have two kids, right? I have a 10-year-old and a 5-year-old, and I try to get them comics whenever I can that are like not manga and stuff. And, of course that stuff is great, but I feel like I want them to get in the characters that I grew up reading,
Yeah.
And so your Pepper Page book is perfect because like my daughter's name is Pepper,
Right. You mentioned that in our exchanges earlier. That's so awesome. I'm so glad for that.
Yeah.
It comes down to, like I was saying before, we moved to doing all ages stuff when we realized we were telling half the people who wanted to read our book that you can't. And I thought, what does this do us in the long run? Where does this take us? So I can include some swear words in this book. Now, I still do books that are not for younger readers. The Last Siege is a very violent story. Danger Club. I mean, you have people getting murdered right on kids going into brutal situations. It's commentary of. The thing is, Danger Club was a commentary against that evolution of comics by going hyperbolic into that realm of hyper violent, extreme comic book, and basically saying, where did we go wrong? How did we get here? Pepper Page is kind of a spiritual successor, return to the kind of stuff we stepped away from for 10 years after Supergirl Cosmic Adventures and a stint on Batman Brave and the Bold. Eric and I stepped away from that kind of material for a little bit. I did Danger Club with him, Last Siege with Justin and Eric and others. And then Eric and I have circled back. I mean, honestly, all ages stuff is where we're happiest. All ages stuff, the work you do writing, I think it weighs on you one way or the other. It leaves a mark on you. You have to put yourself in an emotional space where you can feel what your characters are feeling. And when that's wonder and joy versus depression, rage, and all that, like you are in two different headspaces. And I rather live in the joy space there. Wonder and joy and optimism and hope. Those are key. And that's what's key with superheroes. And that's what's key with giving them to kids. Not that the characters can't feel pain. I think it's important that they do. And we show kids that there's loss, there's pain, that you work through it, that you struggle. These are real parts of life, but they don't overwhelm and break you.
Yes.
all ages comics give us a chance to do that. And that's why I specify often, I'll say all ages, not kids comics. Because that distinction was lost a long time ago. Just to kind of circle to something you're saying, like when I worked, Eric and I both worked at this comic store, Comic Relief, in the early 90s. And we'd go into the store, or well, the store we worked in, we go in all the time. But it was comics, and then a small corner was the adults only section.
Okay.
What do we have now when you go into a comic book store?
Inverse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did that happen? Why? And retailers, and they mean well. They're often these great people, and they'll come in. They'll go, "Hey, check out my all ages section." And they go, "It's a beautiful little corner." But you have all this space.
Yep.
And it's not their fault. What are they going to? They have to sell what they're being sold by the publishers. Right. And a lot of these publishers have had a lot of trouble figuring out how you sell a comic for kids.
Yeah.
And then look what happened now. We start doing it now. People are like, hey, we knew this when we started doing Disney Adventures. Steve Bailing and others, and his boss Amy were putting the word comics on the cover. They'd noticed a 20% sales boost.
Huh. Okay.
And so they started doing all Comic Zone issues of Disney Adventures, nothing but the comics.
Yeah.
And I was doing books in the early 2000s that were outselling Grant Morrison. We had to just read. We sold about 2 million copies a month of Disney Adventures magazine.
Oh my God!
And with a pass-around readership estimated of 5 million.
Oh my God! And
the funny thing is, because it wasn't the comics industry, you weren't working for the big two. People are like, oh man, you really dropped off the map. It's like, did I? It's in every freaking grocery store.
Yeah.
And I'm wobbling a lot here. And the people are gonna get seasick watching me. Like, please get a steady cam. It's because I keep forgetting I have my headphones tethered to it. I'm like, ah.
Oh yeah.
The what was it? And then when we did Disney Adventures for 7 years, and then we transitioned. Bob Schreck and Jan Jones, and later Elizabeth Marsham moved us over, like brought us in with Supergirl Cosmic Adventures on DC Comics. And then everyone I knew or bumped into like, oh man, you're really moving on up. How does that feel? I'm like, it feels like I went from selling 2 million to 10,000. That's how it feels.
Exactly.
It's fine. It's cool. It's great that I'm in the smaller pond, so I feel so much big. But I mean, it's it's a weird thing.
No, I totally understand. Like, when I was in Walmart the other day with my kids, and I saw they had a comic rack for some company I hadn't heard of, but they had their own like stand, and I was like, that's what you should do. You should have comics in Walmart. I know DC does, and I think maybe even Marvel does. But like when I grew up, I would go to the candy store or like the convenience store, and there'd be a spinner rack, and that's where I would get my comics, or the newsstand. And I know that times have changed, but like that's what we need. We need to like hook kids when they're real young, and get them into these stories.
Yeah. Well, I mean, where the traction is happening is things like Scholastic, publishers like First Second. That's for the first time with Pepper Page Saves the Universe. We shifted from doing the periodical market, which I love. I love comics as sequential storytelling. You get a chapter a month, and it progresses the story. But that's not what the audience is into these days. So doing a done in one trade has a real benefit. So we did a 200-page graphic novel with Pepper Page Saves the Universe. It's our first time, I think, going straight to the trade format. And it goes to the schools, it goes to the libraries, it goes into the newsletters for parents. That's how you reach kids these days. You don't reach them through it. I would love it if we could just do spinner racks, and I do think the check stand space that Disney Adventures had was brilliant, because you're there, your kid is at that point, they're just done. They're like, oh my God. And they look up, because they're small. They look up and they see that rack, they see, Disney Adventures magazine. They see the bright, colorful characters, and they see comics, and they're like, Mom, I want that. And it's not a candy bar. So the parents are like, it's reading. Okay, you know what? I'll spend $3 on this 80-page magazine, kid-sized 80-page magazine for you that has puzzles, games, articles, science things, and comics as well. Or, hey, just the all comics issue. Boom, you can have that too. and it was a shame they gave that space up. They did.
Yeah.
It was some kind of like internal change, and they shut down the magazine, even though it was highly successful, and it was a big mistake.
Yeah, I mean, tell me about it, because like I loved Disney Adventures when I was a kid, and I read it like in the early '90s, and I remember there's one thing that people seem to forget, but they had like the supervillain cards that they did at one point, and that was so awesome. Like kids got to show their ideas for supervillains, and people like professional artists made cards of them.
I didn't actually know that one. I don't think they were doing that when I came on board. That's cool, and I wasn't the age where I was reading it, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds like it was like a little before when you came on, but like essentially like kids would mail in their ideas and people like professional artists would make the character, like a picture of them. It was like the coolest thing I'd ever seen.
That's amazing.
But going back to your before when you talked about how comics you want to have that sense of wonder, and there still is difficulties that the characters face, so there still are difficulties. I feel like Pepper Page is a good example because she's an orphan, and at the start of the book she is really having an unfortunate time. She's doing poorly in school. She feels isolated. She's picked on. So all those kind of traumas that kids experience on a daily basis, Pepper experiences.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we have to learn to. It's all about with Pepper Page, and I think fundamentally a lot of superhero stories can touch on this. It's about believing in oneself, finding power within oneself. Is kind of a theme there, and she becomes a superhero, but she doesn't become a hero until she accepts that she's worthy of being a superhero. She has to believe in herself. That's where her power comes from, is self-worth, and that's a very hard thing for children to learn, to accept. So when we have chances to reinforce these messages, I think it's important. So yeah.
Is she based on a particular person?
No, not specifically in this instance. None of the characters in that book, I think, are named after anyone that I remember. Not that one. I'm going through the names. No.
Yeah. Because she's kind of this universal stand-in for a person that's kind of like the outcast, and she's reading comics, So yeah.
Well, I mean, it all comes from our own experiences in some capacity. So when I was in junior high, I had a difficult time in school. We were not doing well in general, and I had two friends that got me through it largely. So there's a lot of my own experiences in there. Those are two friends I'm still very, very close friends with. Talk to them every week, all the time. And same social group that Eric's from, where he came in a little bit later. But I'm lucky that I had formed a group of friends at a young age that I've stayed with. We've been friends, this group of like 6 to 8 of us, friends consistently for I don't know how long that is now. I'm going to out my age here. For almost pushing 40 years.
Wow. Okay.
So I'm very lucky in that regard, and so there's a little bit of that in there, of course, but it's not a specific. No.
Sure.
It's kind of the every story. It's all of us have these experiences.
Oh yeah, I could definitely relate. And so like on the complete inverse of that, like going away from all ages comics to your more serious work. I know that you've adapted like Odd Thomas, right, from Dean Koontz story, and then also Game of Thrones, right, or Song of Ice and Fire. You did Clash of Kings, right?
Yeah. Still doing. We've got just a couple issues left. It's a 32 issue run, adapting the second book. I didn't do the first one. I'm blanking on the guy's name who did. I have it right here. Hold on. I'm gonna grab it.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. I don't want to forget this guy's name.
Of course.
If I do that. Nope. I'm knocking everything over. It's chaos. It was Daniel Abram did the first one. I think he's one of the people behind the Expanse show.
Oh, cool.
And they brought me in to do the second one. I did do the Odd Thomas one. Wasn't an adaptation, actually. It was an original story we did.
Oh, okay.
So Dean Koontz provided me like a paragraph synopsis, and I blew that up into a manga style graphic novel of like, I think 120 pages.
Yeah.
That was a fun one. I love working on the adaptation stuff, George R. R. Martin stuff. I was a fan.
Yeah.
Going way back. I think I read the first one of the books I read in 2003 or so, Clash of Kings. The first two were out, and I think the third one was just coming out. So whenever that was, and then when the fourth one came out, I went to a signing, and that was me and my sister went, and there was no one there. It was this little basement signing because it hadn't blown up yet. This is before the show.
Oh, okay.
And got to just hang out with George R. R. Martin for like a couple hours, like 20 of us and him just hanging out and chatting. And then and I gave him some of my comics, and we talked about comics, and he had me sign the comics I gave him, so that was nice.
That's
and
awesome.
then I went to the show starts, and I went to a signing with my sister again, but we had to get these advanced tickets, and it was in this theater, and it was filled to capacity, and there was a stage where the screen was, and everyone, just a line would go through, and it's like, it was such a different experience.
Sure.
But working on his stuff, and our goal is to create the most accurate visual interpretation of it we can, so we don't take the liberties that the show took.
Right.
Everything is meant to adhere to his vision as close as possible.
That's excellent. Okay. I haven't looked at the adaptations, but like, is like the Iron Throne different, for example?
Yeah, it's giant. It's so much bigger. In fact, I remember when our artist Mel Ruby did his initial design for it, and our editor Anne, she's George's editor on the books.
Okay.
She looked and said, "No, the Iron Throne," and she described it, and she's like, "It's not like the show. I mean, it is fundamentally similar, but it's like 30 feet tall. It's like so many more weapons fused into this throne. It's so much more just impressive." So, yeah.
So how do you adapt something? I mean, because that book is gigantic too. Like,
oh yeah.
So like, what's the thought process of like, how do you break it down to issues? Like, how's that work?
Well, Anne gave me her breakdown of what she was thinking for. We'll do this many chapters we'll do chapters 1 and 2 for issue 1, chapters 2, 3, and 4 for issue 2, and then every now and again she'll shuffle the order of the chapters just a little bit. So we don't have like back to back the same character sort of thing or whatever, just so it flows a little better. But I take the chapters, I get them into text on my screen, I go through and I just start separating it into comic formats, like taking a dialogue and breaking it into, instead of its natural prose, it'll be Tyrion, and then in a like for his dialogue, and in a little like screen kind of storytelling kind of way, like, so it's all broken down, and then I can visualize it, right? Sure. And then I go, I know we can have 2 to 3 word balloons per panel, so I'll do an estimate of how many panels, like we'd have to have a panel break here for this amount of dialogue, fit this much dialogue in a panel, this much. So it's really based on how much dialogue you can fit in a panel, and you have to really have looked at how much dialogue fits in a panel. And then I go through and go, well, we can have an average of 5 panels a page. Let's see how that breaks down to. Okay, I've got 21 pages. This breaks down into 48 pages. So then you start going through, well, what can we consolidate? What are we telling visually? What do we cut? What do we have to lose? We want to keep everything we can. Every scrap you can keep, you want to keep. How can we tell this story? Like have you read the books?
All of them, yes, yeah.
Okay, so book 2, Clash of Kings, what is it? They're going into, I gotta plug in my iPad, I just realized here.
Sure.
So I'm gonna be all like wiggly here for a second. Sorry, people who are watching this. There we go. Okay. You see my puppet still on the camera? I love that puppet. And there we go. Okay. What was it? Daenerys. That's what I was saying. Daenerys leads her people into the desert, looking for, like, we can go one way. She leads them to this. I forget what it is, but they're in the desert for a few weeks.
Yeah.
And during this they're dying as they go.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, all right, we need to get clever. We have to get a sense of time passing. So I laid out the page, and I basically said, I had 2 pages for this sequence. The whole sequence of desert. I've got 2 pages. How do you do that without really relying on the prose?
Yeah.
So I said, okay, let's do a I'm drawing it out now.
Sure.
I did layouts for this. I said, let's do a 2-page spread that's functionally like this.
Oh,
It's a
cool.
sun.
Yeah.
Each panel alternates from day to night to day to night. So we get a sense of the passage of time just by glancing at it.
Yeah.
In the center of it is this burning sun. So we get a sense of this oppressive heat.
Yeah.
And then we have the prose, which helps guide us through. It's all the captions of excerpts from what George wrote, combined with the pictures of a corpse baking in the sun,
Yeah.
And when we see Daenerys through it, her hair is changing its length.
Oh, okay. Wow.
So right there, everything you have to think about is how do you convey the passage of time in 2 pages? And that was my solution. Every issue has a puzzle like this somewhere. I usually do like a couple pages of thumbnails or layouts when it's a tricky thing. Like I did the thumbnails and laid out the page like this one for the artist.
Yeah.
Then we got to the battle on the Blackwater.
Yeah.
I did all the thumbnails for the battle because I knew it was going to be such an important story point. Everything of that book is just pushing towards that moment.
Sure.
And so I had to figure out how I could. I broke it down into splash pages with inset panels, breaking it then as a battle escalates into 2-page spreads with inset panels.
Mm-hmm.
And I did actually full on, like, here's a ship crashing into the ship. Here's this one's on fire. I did it's the first time I've done that to that depth. And then the next issue, I did the other side of the battle, Tyrion. And that's where it gets really trippy, is Tyrion goes into his battle.
Right.
Plus, he's talking about, Jamie refers to it as like this battle craze, and everyone, all you know is you're alive and they are not. All you know is they are dying and you are not. It's
right.
And so how do you get really trippy with that stuff to convey it? I've seen the art for the first part of the battle. The art for the second part of the battle hasn't come in yet, so I'm looking forward to it.
Oh man, that's cool, because when there's adaptations of something like that in existing, like let's say a novel or a movie even too, I feel like a lot of the times the setup of the actual comic is very like standard. Like there's not a lot of experimentation with the imagery itself. Like you don't really see what you were just describing with the sun and the changing of time. Go ahead.
It's interesting. We have to use every tool at our advantage, and the mistake I think a lot of people make is they get too literal. Did you ever watch the Batman Brave and the Bold cartoon?
Of course, yes.
Okay, so Eric and I worked on there it is. That's Eric's art for a
awesome.
we did. We worked on several issues of that, and had that great. It always start with a cold start opening, and then like of just Batman with say Plastic Man, and then it would be this great credit sequence, and then we'd get the real story. And other creators are coming in and doing this, and there was just one part would end, and then you turn the page and the cold start would just flow right into the main story. I'm like, we can't do that. So we actually gave up half a page of real estate and did this big, bold credit sequence. And I'm going to
please
show you something.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So Eric drew this credit sequence here. So this was at the top.
Oh, cool.
It was at the top of the page.
Yeah.
And then below that would be the title, which was the next half of the page. And then we would start at the very bottom. We'd start the full next story. We gave up 2/3 of the real estate of an entire 20-page comic.
Right.
Just to capture the tone of the show.
That's
cool. Then I came in on Clash of Kings, and it was a similar thing. They didn't do this on the Game of Thrones adaptation. I said, this is a mistake. I finished a Cersei chapter. I turn the page. It's just flowing right into a Tyrion chapter. I don't get a feeling of the break.
Yeah.
So I said, we have to put, just like the novels have the character's name, we have to give up the top of each of that page
Okay.
You put the character's name in the same font, and because it creates a mental break. You turn the page and you see this bold, this white area, a black name, this absence, and all that.
Absolutely.
You're creating same thing we did with Batman Brave and the Bold. We created a break so that you're actually, everyone talks about keeping a reader in the story. Sometimes you purposely want to push the reader out of the story and then pull them back in so that you can change location, you can change tone, you can change space in general.
Yeah, that's interesting. So when you're adapting it, because okay, first of all, I love that you took from the books, because that is such an integral part of the book. It's like, here's a new point of view, here's a new character, right?
Mm-hmm.
But speaking of those characters, then, like, I'm sure that from the Game of Thrones comic, they have established like what the characters look like in their art, their design. But then, is it up to you to explain what they look like then, or are they going off of George's notes? Like, how does that work as far as like new characters that are introduced in that book?
That comes from Anne and Rhea Golden. She's George's assistant. She works with them every day, I think, like in the same space they work together. And the three of us, I say the three of us, have our own little internal conversations, but mostly it's them. I'm usually just going, that sounds neat. I don't have a lot to add to that. And to be honest, I don't tend to think about it a lot because it's not my world, and it's best to let them shepherd that. I worry about the structural elements of how do we make this fit? How do we convey the mood, the emotion, the tone? And I leave that to the people who know what they're doing, which is, Anne and Rhea work with George constantly. Yeah. They're involved in that. So I don't get involved. Yeah. But there is a lot of oversight, and it's all. And George is looking at all this. He's read. He sees it all. So he's given his thumbs up. That works.
What I've always found intriguing about like the Game of Thrones artwork, like that's inspired, like official artwork or fan artwork, is that it seems to be consistent, right? Like Cersei always looks a certain way, Jaime always looks a certain way, and then they kind of match the way they look in the show. The show kind of matches that artwork. But then I was going to say Tyrion seems to be the biggest departure, right? Because Tyrion is a lot more unattractive in the book than Peter Dinklage, right? And then I'm guessing that in your adaptation, like his nose is truly cut off, right?
Well, we haven't. I'm just laying out that issue where he wakes up afterwards. So we haven't seen how he looks yet. I'm curious. I mean, I would think so, right?
Yeah,
it has to be. But I haven't seen what the decision will be exactly, how far we go with that. But that is the general of it. Like, for an example, Daenerys loses her hair, burns off. Her hair is gone. And then it has to slowly grow back, which instead in the show they didn't want to do that. Like, no, she's going to keep her hair. People like her hair. Arya, she gets her head shaved down to resemble a boy early on. Gets her hair roughly cut. It's not shaved, but roughly cut off. So we had to make sure that landed properly. Then something I make a concerted effort to do is I take a lot of the sexual scenes and even some of the violent scenes, and I push them just off camera in certain ways. I am a fan of the shadow behind the curtain, the unseen having more power than the seen.
Of course.
So you've got these scenes of Tyrion with Shay, for an example. I'm like, we can have so much more power rather than having him like push her down and pull her clothes off and we see it. We pull back and we're going outside the building, and the building is becoming more distant, and we have the dialogue that matches, and we know what's happening. But what we're going to conjure in our minds at that moment is going to be, it's going to be the version of it that clicks best with us, be it sexual tension, or titillation, or horror, violence, and revulsion. It's going to be whatever version of that is most potent to us. As soon as you lock it into an image, you might draw something that's very resonates really strong with one person, but to another person, it's like, yeah, okay. But you leave it to the mind's eye. The mind's eye is unique to each person, and it's just a more powerful storytelling tool. So
that's excellent, because like honestly, that was one of the things I felt like was wrong with the show, because like one example, and this we've kind of been talking about Game of Thrones spoilers, but the scene when Stannis burns his daughter, right, on the in the show, which we haven't gotten to in the books, right?
Yeah.
I always felt like that was a good example of how gratuitous the show was, where it's just like right in your face. Whereas I felt like they could have just done that scene. Maybe she sees the pole that she's going to be burned on, and then they cut away to another scene, and they just show the ashes or something. Like, I feel like that's much more effective versus like shoving it in your face just because they're like, see how horrible this is? Here it is.
Yeah.
You know, like yeah, that bothers me.
Well, the prose novels have an advantage that even the comics don't. Well, the comics can. We can play it this way, and the TV show could, but it's most effective with novels. Like when Theon Greyjoy loses Winterfell. I thought when I read the book the first time, I thought that's it. He just died. I thought he was dead. I just believed that was it. He was done. And it wasn't until it was revealed that he was alive. I'm like, when you see it in the show, you can kind of look and go, oh yeah, he's alive. Yeah. And then of course you get this, you hear, well, that actor has been signed for another season. And it's like, right. Okay, I guess he didn't die. You get that as a Doctor Who fan, let me tell you. You ever watch Doctor Who?
Yes, I do, yeah.
I'm a Doctor Who fan going way back. I was a member of the fan club when I was 12. I'm like hardcore Doctor Who. I hate that they announce when the Doctor is leaving.
Oh, yeah,
I hate that. Like, because we actually have a bit of fiction where the Doctor may die at any time, and you don't know. And you're watching going, is this it? Are we going to get a new Doctor? And it's like, well, I know they're not, because they already announced that this person is going to be the Doctor for X amount more time. It's like, it changes the stakes when we actually know that our hero might die. That's powerful. Why? And people are like, well, you have to announce it so you get people excited. Man, you know what's exciting is not knowing.
Yes, thank you.
So,
yes, completely agree. Well, you know, just one other thing too with your adult fiction too. Like, speaking of not knowing what's going to happen because it's not adapted, right? And we don't know where it's going. With The Last Siege, for instance, that is all your story, right?
Yes.
And I know that it's based sort of on historical events, but you didn't want to make it a specific historical event.
Yeah, because it's based on it's a rich stew of historical events mixed together in something different. Because there's points of history all kind of pulled together. It's most of it. Its core is the story Hereward the Wake, who was sent from his, like, he was a young Saxon lord whose family said, go be a mercenary. We're done with you because you're an upstart and a brat, and you basically got sent away. And then he gets these letters saying, come home fast, things are bad, there's going to be war. But by the time he gets home, the Normans have conquered England, and his family's heads are all on stakes, and the Normans are all like partying in his house, and he goes into a rage. He murders them all, and basically after that, he's like, I'm going to murder every Norman. And then different political parties start using him. It's actually a really fascinating historical tale. And so that is the foundation of The Last Siege. I found that story very interesting. I went on a rant there.
No, it's all great. So it's been out for 2 years at this point, right? And you made it for Image. Is that your first Image book, or have you done other stuff with Image?
Danger Club was an Image book also.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Those are the only two. We did Danger Club and Last Siege. I am not the most prolific creator when it comes to my creator-owned material. I do have like multiple projects in various stages of work, but it takes years sometimes to develop this stuff. Then figuring out how to pay for it, figuring out how to get it, and then getting a publisher. I have a really good relationship there with Image. They've been really good to me. I like working with them, and I have a couple other things in the works I've given them first look on. Because they're good people, and I work well with them. But nice. We do end up, sometimes they're not the right place. Like Pepper Page Saves the Universe. We want to hit the school age and crowd, and the publisher of The Walking Dead isn't necessarily the publisher of Pepper Page Saves the Universe, sort of thing. Right.
Completely agree. Yeah. So then, like, right now you have Clash of Kings that's going on, right? That's coming out. And then what other products do you have coming out down the road?
Well, I'm always working on a variety of things that no one really thinks about, and isn't only pseudo worth mentioning. That doing some different magazine stuff. Like I just worked a little bit on a Clone Wars magazine for Disney. Just it's like this is like about the show. It's kind of fun stuff. Again, like I did the Ultimate Guide to Wonder Woman, an example for DK Books, which was great because I read 700 issues of Wonder Woman comics and gave a detailed, like, here's every era of Wonder Woman. I did a few of those, but now I have a new Star Wars piece coming out with IDW, Star Wars Adventures Volume 2, Issue 7. I'm doing a backup story. It's just the 8-page bit at the end, but it's going to be a return of the Crimson Corsair from
nice.
Finally, I've been trying to get them. Please let me do it. I bug them like crazy. Please let me do more Crimson Corsair. Yeah. And it takes place shortly after my first story of the Crimson Corsair. Not much time has passed.
Okay.
So the characters in that will be the characters in the new one.
Nice.
And it's a fun. It's an absurd story. I'm working with I'm blanking on his name. Nick is his first name. Brokenshire, I believe it. Yeah. Okay. I don't know him well. We've been working on it, but I love the art he's producing on this. It's just beautiful, very experimental in his color use, and his designs are just really just fluid and weird. He's got a real good sense of the weird. I'm trying to see if we can, push forward and do more, because I want to do a lot more with the Crimson Corsair. I want to do a lot more that connects back from the set in the Force Awakens era, that connects back to the Clone Wars, which is what the Crimson Corsair story in my short story does. It's all
right.
And
Count Dooku. Yeah. That is awesome, man. Yeah, because that character, just aesthetically, that character is so cool. And he's unique as a Star Wars character too, just as far as like what people know about Star Wars in general. And I really do think that they need to flesh out these sort of ancillary characters that are in the new movies. They need to kind of grow that way. I know that like the Mandalorian is great and like people are really raving about that, but that sequel trilogy has some stuff that can be mined. Just
absolutely.
Like this.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that, there are, like, for me, every era of Star Wars has its pluses and minuses, because I don't believe there's no such thing as a perfect film, the perfect entertainment, the perfect medium. There is only the attempt at that, and there's a lot I think I would love to see expanded on and shaped and played with. Am I saying anything? Am I spoil anything from the last season of Mandalorian? Am I allowed to do that?
Spoil anything. We're good.
I think we're past the statute of limitations on that.
Yeah,
it's so clear when watching them connect. One, they did this little bit of a bridge with when Grogu there, Baby Yoda, is captured, and we get a line about midichlorians in there, and the hint of why they want those is for something that connects us all the way to Rise of Skywalker. They just connected Phantom Menace to Rise of Skywalker in like a couple bits of dialogue. Just boom. This connective tissue of the Star Wars universe is what makes it so interesting. They built sometimes a story may not work for you as a reader, as a viewer, as a watcher, any participant. That's okay, because the overall broad strokes of the universe, of the galaxy, technically, are so interesting, so intriguing, and there's so much infinite potential. And maybe this one doesn't, like on that Clone Wars magazine, I had to curate these different interviews. So it was an interview with Dave Filoni, and he was talking about in the Clone Wars how they do an arc that was more for the younger kids, and then they do an arc that was, we brought in the art director or whatever, or the cinematographer from Apocalypse Now to do it for it. So you got the all ages one, and then you've got this war story where the characters are like struggling with moral imperatives of killing, and then Jar Jar Binks. It's like it's brilliantly, beautifully done in that regard, because it's Star Wars is it's all ages, and you have to accept sometimes that means one of them may not be exactly for you. That's okay. It's still a movie about somebody with a sword made of laser who's got magic powers on a spaceship. Right. That's never going to be bad. It's never going to be bad for me. That's always going to be good.
Yeah. Well, Landry, I really appreciate talking with you today, and I've had a lot of fun, and like you just kind of taught me a few things about the industry in general, honestly. and it's really great to talk to someone who's had such a prolific career, you know. So I don't know if you'd ever want to come back on the show, but like if you ever wanted to, I'd love to have you on again.
Yeah, maybe after my IDW stuff is out and we can reflect on it. We can look at that at some point. It'd be great.
Yeah.
I had a lot of fun.
Dude, thank you so much. So we'll probably get this up, within this week, and I'll talk to you soon then.
Awesome. Thanks a lot.